Let's see, is it working? Let's see, is it working?
Come on, I'm a busy fella.
You're a busy fellow, are you, Jonathan? What have you got next? Yes.
I've got 7 more shares to have before lunch.
Good. Right. We are live. Well done. And we're going to record on this computer. Right. It's okie dokie. I'm just going to mute you for a moment. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and we should be able to do it. So, first of all, thank you for agreeing for the slightly different time. It just made life a bit easier. Chai was able to finish her work. Another heads up, next week, Tuesday, we've got a hospital appointment in Sheffield, so there will not be a share on Tuesday. And I give Shirem on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday as well. So there is no other day to put it on. So next week, Tuesday, there won't be, but the next year anyway will be going into the origins, the beginning of Islam, or more importantly, its impact on the Jewish world. So whether or not we'll do that, we will have to see. So this week, share history preamble as we make our way through our 6th one in the series. We are looking from the 5 to 600, so the 6th century in the Common Era. And interestingly enough, when I was doing a little bit more reading, we quoted this book the other day, the Igeres, the letter of Rav Sherira Gaon, written quite a bit later on, not till the 8th century. So all of the dates he puts in are all in the Seleucid era. So, for example, we're looking at this time now. So he's quoting about an event that took place in the year 609, but he actually calls it in the year 920. And then in brackets, the translator says that's 920 Seleucid, 609 CE of the Common Era. Makes it easier for us. We're working along those dates. But obviously, of course, everyone's years and their timings, how it would be. Where do we move along in Judaism as well? Originally, we spoke about X number of years from the day we left Egypt. We had last week said Bamidbar, and it was on the first day of the 2nd month of the 2nd year since we left from Egypt. When we count 5780 this year, it's actually interesting in that it's slightly not Jewish, in that we're not counting from the beginning of Judaism, but rather we're counting from the creation of the world. We're the only ones who don't count the years from the beginning of our religion. The year 2020 it's a presupposed date of when a certain guy may or may not, well, most probably was not born. And so we go on from there. The Islamic era, which begins next week, as we will see, Muhammad himself is born in 570, so our century, so it actually fits in. And he dies in the year 632. What becomes year 1? 10 years earlier, when he flees to Mecca. In fact, when he flees to Mecca in order to run for his life. So that becomes year 1 within that calendar. So within Judaism, we began originally referring to it from the date we left Egypt. Then it would be referred to by the year of the reign of the king. So, which is why you also have a lot of discussion. There was a video that went out last week about Yom Yerushalayim, and it highlights, and I know we're off topic here, but it's important concept for us to remember. They were giving a brief history of Jerusalem, and when they come to the Second Temple, the whole thing I think is like 12-15 minutes going through 2,000 years. So it's they're not spending a long time on anything, but he speaks about the Second Temple built by Zerubbabel during the time of Ezra, when the Jews came back after the Babylonian exile, which he says was there for 650 years. Now, I'm not sure why they say that, because we have a tradition. It was there for 410 years. But there is a thing called the missing 160 years. There is a discrepancy between the dates, the way they're calculated in the Jewish books and the way they're calculated in the non-Jewish ones. Now, if you've got, as a number of you have got the book Dor L'Dor, you will see the second Beis HaMikdash. They've got, and they go through decade by decade. The 420, sorry, the first Beis HaMikdash was 410, the second one was 420. The reason for the discrepancy between the way we calculate it and the way it's calculated by non-Jewish historians is because time and again it's counted according to a specific event. What year are we in? Oh, we're in the second year of the reign of this king. Those do not always match up. If you're counting the year 5780, there's 12 months in a year. It's a very easy way to know when a year starts, when a year ends. And so you're able to count those years. If you're going on to other events that took place, i.e., the birth of someone, the death of someone, the expulsion of a religious leader, the coronation of a king, the upheaval, those events don't always take place on the first day of the year. They take place mid-year, and you often have a miscalculation. The most famous miscalculation was because of that was actually done by Achashverosh. During the story of Purim, so just a second. Can you all hear the lawnmower in the background? Oh, no, it's obviously not disturbing you too badly, so fine, not a problem. I can hear it. I've got my microphone directly pointed towards my mouth, so hopefully it's just picking this up. But in the background, the gardener decided to come right now. But Achashverosh, he knew of the prophecy that the destruction would last for 70 years, and he counted 70 years. The reason for his mistake, even though it was twofold. One, when did those 70 years begin? At the expulsion of the Jews, which will come up again here, or at the destruction of the temple, or of the exile of all of the Jews. When did this? But the other reason for his miscalculation is half of a year of a king's reign is an entire year. In much the same way we have part of a day for Shiva as a whole day. If you started your reign on the Rosh Chodesh Shvat, by the time it comes to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, you are into your second year. And so you can have a part of year being counted as a full year. So just an important thing to look at when you're going through the books of the dates. It's very, very difficult always to combine the two together. It gets a lot easier once we have the set calendars, which we looked at 2 weeks ago, both that of Julian in the year 325, and of course our own set calendar, which corresponded to the Gregorian one, the Julian one in 350. And so the years we're dealing with now from the year 500 to 600. Having said that as a little bit of an introduction, and it's important because history ebbs and flows. The next 500 years, as far as the Western Christian Europe is concerned, is viewed as a dark ages from the year 500 through to the year 1000, even from the year 1000 onwards, when we have the start of the Crusades. It's not necessarily a spiritually enlightened era, but from 500 to 1000 is very much a dark ages with regards to the aspect of Western Europe. The Western Church itself also goes quite dark for those 500 years, but the majority of the Jews are living under the Greek Orthodox Church. There are Jews in Israel. Let us remember, though, that we'd been officially banned, kicked out of Jerusalem after the Great Revolt with Bar Kokhba in the years 130, 133 to 135. We had been officially kicked out of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the first city in the world to be called Judenrein. The 10th Legion of the Roman army was stationed in Jerusalem in order to guard it. They were at Shar Shechem, Damascus Gate, and you can still see them built on top of the original Damascus Gate. If you go there now, well, it's not exactly the safest place at the moment, although it's right in East Jerusalem, so it's not many of you will have frequented it. I once, by mistake, was taking my mother for a walk in Jerusalem, turned left just before Shari Afan, and went along via Damascus Gate and walked the whole way around until we came in through Shar Ashba Dung Gate. But you can see there now, that's the wall obviously built by Solomon the Magnificent in the 16th century, but you can see beneath it the original tower block, guard tower, that was there from the Roman period, and the 10th Legion was stationed there the whole way through to Zion Gate. Jews were not allowed in Jerusalem. It was Judenrein, except for one day of the year, Which day of the year were we allowed into Jerusalem? Anybody know that? Raise your hands and I will unmute you. You can unmute yourself. Yes, Jonathan.
The day it was destroyed.
Correct, Tisha B'Av. You're right. Well done. On Tisha B'Av, we were allowed to go into Jerusalem, and we would see the temple from looking at it via the Western Wall. That's one of the reasons why the Western Wall became such an icon within our religion, because for a long time, the only official view we were allowed to have of Jerusalem was from there. However, there is evidence of Jews living in Israel throughout. There is no major presence at the moment at the centers that we're dealing with. There is no major presence in Israel. We sort of had to move in last week's lesson in the 4th to 5th century. Now in the 6th century, we are really not got much of a presence within Jerusalem. By the 9th, 10th, so in a couple of weeks' time, we'll get to there, is when the Jewish community starts to reinvigorate itself. You've got the 13th century Ramban Nachmanides, not to be confused with Maimonides, but Nachmanides has got to flee from Spain after the great debate in Barcelona, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks' time. He establishes a shul in the old city of Jerusalem. And then, of course, we've got a total reinvigoration of the Jews of Israel, Cephas mainly in the 16th century, when we have the Kabbalists moving there and the composition of Lechadodi, etc. But that's another 10 weeks until we get there. At the moment, though, in the 6th century Common Era, Judaism in Israel is very much hit and miss. There are a couple of families here, a couple of families there. As an organized community, very much not that. Let's just move a little bit over towards Christian Europe from the end of the 5th century. So the year 397, shuls were already forbidden to be a place of asylum, a place of refuge. Until that point, if somebody was fleeing, they could go to shul and it was viewed as, this is sacred, this is sanctified ground. You have to leave them alone. Sort of like what's his name? WikiLeaks founder, whatever the guy's name is finding in the Ecuadorian Julian Assange. He's finding asylum within the Ecuadorian embassy. A shul was like that. From 397, shuls were banned. From 415, no new shuls were allowed to be built within the Roman Empire. From 423, if the non-Jews desecrated a shul, the only way it could be rebuilt up again was as a church. So the shul was seen very much as a symbol of Jewish strength, and the Roman Empire, both East and West, tried to knock them down or limit their use. Interestingly enough, and Ian will say, as always, we create a rod for our own back. One of the reasons for this is because the Jews very much viewed the new churches that were being done with all of their iconography that was put in it, with the mosaics, as being heretical. And we look down our noses at them, although by the time it comes to the 10th century, we very much copy them. And even earlier, you can find shuls in Tzipori and elsewhere which have copied the little mosaics. But there is still there's this pull, and Jews are very much banned. We do have in places where they never met Jews, that the monks keep the concept alive of the Jews being the God killers. They committed the sin of deicide and therefore have got to be persecuted. Up until 1920, there was always a division within the Roman Catholic Church of the Pope's Jews, because they believe that there has to be a cohort, a small cohort of Jews left behind for when the second coming happens, for the Jews to accept Yoshki. But other than that, Jews were allowed to be killed, but let's keep a small group of them aside. And up until 1920, when a new pope was inaugurated, the shul in Rome had to come out holding their Sifrei Torah. Let's remember the shul in Rome Its nusach is older than Ashkenaz. It's older than Sephard. Much, much older. Let's move into our own century. In the east, under the Byzantine Empire, we've got Justinian. Now, whether any of you recognizes the name Justinian or not, you will definitely know what he achieved. Because even for those of you who have never heard of the concept of Shacharis on Shabbos, in fact, I had a congregant, not in this shul, in another shul, who in the run-up to his son's bar mitzvah, we're telling him he's got to come to shul a little bit more. He said, he goes, Rabbi, he says, I've always wondered why there's so much extra pages before that, davening begins at Musaf, what's all this extra stuff before? And it never crossed. He was being slightly tongue-in-cheek because he knew very much about it. But that does underscore something very interesting, because Justinian, in between the years 527 and 565, put his foot down on a lot of Jewish religious practices. And one of the main things which they stopped, anybody want to shout out what it was? Not Yuchaya. Jeffrey Bloch, I read your lips. You said Shema. Yeah, for some reason I tried to unmute you when I'm you. Correct. The saying of the Shema. They saw the saying of Shema as being heretical. And they viewed it as being specifically the declaration, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Those words, those 6 words, come from Devarim. They come from the Old Testament. Yet they viewed it as being something that was specifically written to have a go against Yoshki, the one God, as opposed to the Trinity. And so therefore Justinian banned it. And he put guards at the entry to the shuls to make sure that the Jews did not say Shema in the morning. Once Shacharis was over, the guards left because they knew Abba's money, bottles money, the time is gone. It's a waste of time. You're not going to do it anymore. And that's why Shema was inserted into the repetition of Musaf Amida in the Kedusha. What Shema got to do with that? It doesn't fit in with Kedusha at all. Kedusha is us saying what the angels say, Nekadesh Hashimcha Naritzach, depending on your version, but let us sanctify your name like they do it upstairs. What do they say? They say, Kadosh, 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 Baruch Hashem in Komlo Yimloich. That's what the angels say. The angels do not say Shema Yisrael at all. And including the next paragraph within that there, that we say within the Kedusha, Musaf, we talk about the redemption of the Jews. So ironically, Hu Yashmienu Barachim of Shenis, he will redeem us with his mercy a second time. This was composed specifically for that time when we were in our second major exile, the first one being the exile of Babylon, the second one being the Roman exile, even though from a rabbinic point of view, we view that as being the 4th exile, because we've already got the earlier exiles of the Assyrians and the exile of Egypt. But post the first Beis Hamikdash, we've got just the Babylonian and now the Roman one. So Justinian in the east, under the Byzantine Empire, bans the recitation of shuls. He interferes within the conduct of a shul. We learned last week about Peros the Wicked, who had already kidnapped a lot of the Jewish children, had imprisoned a lot of the rabbis. So even in the, so to speak, nicer east, things were not good. In the west, the Visigoths, who had already sacked Rome, they now come along, and in 589, within Spain, they ban the official open practice of Judaism. Bearing in mind, Jews had been living in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula since the year 0, i.e., since not long after, since before the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, there'd already been a Jewish community in Spain. We know that there'd been a vibrant Jewish community in Italy because the Gemara speaks about the messages that would go there and back from the Tanoim, the rabbis of the time of the Mishnah, and how they would converse and traverse between Jerusalem and Rome. It's the basis of the whole book from, what's the name? Jerusalem and Rome. Who's it I'm thinking of? Who wrote the great big fat white book, Jerusalem and Rome? Come on, Ian. You should remember his name. Ian, who's it I'm thinking of?
Martin Goodman?
No, not him. The new one. I'll pick it up next one. If you get it. Sorry, Jonathan?
Montefiore.
Thank you very much. Montefiore's new book. Ian is an old-fashioned scholar, so he remembers Martin Goodman's. That's what I did in university. But I'm thinking of the new one of Montefiore's book.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, right. In fact, I'm going to mute all of you other than Alan because Alan, sorry, just because your microphone makes a lot of unwanted noise. We won't call it crackling in case the boys get excited again. So you've been
Rabbi,
muted.
I was at the Hebrew University with Martin Goodman for a year.
I'm a bit younger than you are. I just learned this book. So Judaism was banned.
You're younger than Montefiore as well.
Yes, true. Judaism was banned in Spain in 589. Here we're talking about the Western religion. And not long later on, in the year 613, ironic, that is year 613, the Jews of Spain were given the option either convert or to be expelled. If that sounds familiar, it's exactly what was picked up in 1492 by the wicked Ferdinand and Isabella when they turned the crusade and the Inquisition against the Jews and said either they had to convert us. That was 879 years later. The rules on the law books that were put into place in the year 613 were still valid in the year 1492, and they just pulled them out of the old law book. So from time to time, people mention old ancient rules, which, oh, well, you don't need to worry about that. Always be aware, if a law is in the law books, the fact that it's no longer enforced doesn't mean anything. It's still against the law. And there are various ones that you can still be pulled up from nowadays in the world. But in Spain, already back in the year 613, it was forbidden to be Jewish. Now, during this time in the West, it creeps into the Eastern Empire as well. Mainly in the East, it creeps a little bit into the Western Empire, is the concept of a monastic lifestyle. The reason why this has been picked up on by the Christians was because the first Christians were monastic. Yoshki's teacher was John the Baptist, who was from Jewish and Essene, and they continued this lifestyle, and the monks had some massive, beautiful places. In fact, there was one, let me just find the name of one of them. There was, during the Byzantine era, there was in a place called Mar Saha, which is a beautiful, whereabouts is it? It's within Israel, a massive complex of caves that where the monks would live. And if you go along to visit it, the size and the architecture are absolutely still very much awesome to look at nowadays. Obviously, within Judaism, we don't have this. Al-Tifrish min at-Sibra, don't separate yourself from the community. There, an individual could do that, would be a Nazir, a Nazirite could go through this time. Now, we looked last week a lot at the closing of the Talmud in the year 500. That finishes the era of the Amoraim. So just to a little bit of a recap, we've got the Zugos, the pairs, which goes a whole way back to the time of Shimon HaTzadik, the story of Hanukkah. We're in the 2nd century BCE. That starts, then goes along to the time of the Tannaim, when you got Hillel and Shammai going along. That's the end of the Zugos, the beginning of the Tannaim, until Rebbe redacts the Mishnah in the 1st century Common Era. And then you've got the Amoraim, who discuss it up until the year 500. The next group of people are the Savoraim. And there is a big argument as to how long the Savoraim lasted and what did they actually do. They sort of meld into the Gaonic period, which sort of lasts from 590 the whole way through for the next 400-500 years. But the Savoraim are very interesting because they are living at a time when can they paskin halacha or not? Is what they've written, is it allowed to be included within the text of the Talmud? So Rav Shri Gaon, he says there were the years of persecution and suffering at the end of the Persian rule. So right about the year 559 CE, so right in the middle of our century, when the rabbis couldn't institute Pirkei. Pirkei is a sermon that was given every single week before Musaf. And this was given to the masses. It was not necessarily done to the sages, to the scholars, to the students. It was given to the masses. They couldn't establish the Mesifta. The Mesifta is the daily shiur for the students, the scholars. They weren't able to do that. And they couldn't have the regular duties of the Gaonim, which are the heads of the yeshiva. And that happened for a number of years until they had to leave Pumbedisa, which was the main yeshiva, which shut at the moment here for about, well, whether it doesn't really shut, but it moves to Perot Shavor from the year 550 through to 6. So for 110 years, we are in Perot Shavor. Just to give you an idea of the size of it, by the time we come along to the year 656, so right towards the end of it, there are 90,000 Jews living in the city of Perot Shavira. Ali al-Bakled is the caliph at that point. We're at the very beginning of Islam, and you've got 90,000 Jews living in what is basically just a yeshiva town. But this was established by the time of the Saveroim, and it's a question, what did they actually achieve? Were they able to include within the Gemara what it is that they wanted to write? So Rav Shri Gaon says that once the Talmud was closed in 500, anything that they wrote then couldn't be used as a halachic determination. Rambam, Maimonides, in its introduction to Mishnah Torah, writes a similar sort of thing, and he tells us what I find quite interesting. So what happens after the Beis Din? So I'm reading here from the introduction to Maimonides' Mishnah Torah. Once you've got the Beis Din of Rav Ashi, that's when we learned about last week, who closed the Talmud in the year 500. Shechiber HaTalmud b'mei b'noi Gemara, he finished it and he closed it. The Jews were spread all over the world, and they came to villages and to islands, all distant places away, and there was a lot of unrest within the world, and it gets a lot more difficult. So Talmud Torah, the learning of Torah, has been minimized. The Jews are not able to congregate together. Sometime later on, once things have been settled down under Islam, ironically, the study of Torah under Islam rises. But before that time, we're still under Persian rule, where the Byzantine Empire is going in. You got the Parthians. Islam has not yet risen. Thank God it did, because had Islam not arisen, then the way the Eastern Church was going, Judaism would have really, really struggled. So whilst we may sometimes view the rise of Islam as being problematic for Jews, without them, Judaism in the East would have struggled as much as Judaism in the West. And we needed Judaism in the East to survive for the next 500 years until we get to Judaism rising once again in the West, once we get to the year 1000. So during that time, we were not able to gather together in yeshivas, but rather there were a few. There were those, Asridim Hashem Kera, there were a couple who called out to Hashem in every city and every town, and they themselves would have their own little group. And therefore, says Rambam something very important. Every Beis Din that established itself and made a decree or ruled some minhag, some custom, some law for his locale where he is in charge, that did not necessarily spread to all the Jewish people, because of the distance between where they lived and the difficulty of traveling between one way and the other. And most importantly, each Beis Din has got its own authority here. You cannot have a rule set up. I don't know, let's take, for example, you had a Beis Din in Brussels, and they decide to tell the Jews in England what it is that they're going to do. Yeah, disgrace. I don't know why those two locales came into my mind. But you can't have, or to quote someone else, no taxation without representation. You can't be told by a distant monarch what it is that you're going to do. A Beis Din does not have its authority over everywhere. Why? Because the Beis Din Hagadol Shel Shivim, the great big Sanhedrin of 70, has already been stopped a number of years before the Talmud. Therefore, says Rambam, you cannot force men or people of another locale to keep our minhag, and you can't tell them that they've got to make their own decree there. You got to listen along. Plus, if you learned something from one of the Gaonim that he did it like this, and now you have a different way of doing it, you are allowed to set up your own one, and every community has got to follow the laws of its community. Now, it's interesting as to how much of that still applies nowadays, how much of it has now separated, because you've got areas of excellence, and you've got certain yeshivas, certain rabbis who have authority all over the place. We know later on, we'll get to it when we get up to Napoleon, tries to re-establish in France this Sanhedrin. And there were a number of rabbis that were for it, a number who were very much against it, because mainly Napoleon was doing it out of a sense of emancipation, not for the rights of the Jews. But we had recently, Rav Steinsaltz wanted to re-establish a Sanhedrin by name, if not by official authority, but being able to actually tell people what it is that they should do, that they should follow along. So Rav Shri Ragon, going back to the Savarim, he says that it was undecided by the Amoraim. It might have been explained by them, but it wasn't necessarily put in as halacha. And I don't know why he quotes this one over here, but he was he quotes it. This is chapter 8 from the letter of Rav Shri Ragon. He's quoting from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, saying here's a typical example of what the Savaroim, their footnotes are included in. If someone is led out to an execution, he's given a drink of frankincense in order to numb his senses, because, quoting the Pasuk, says, give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine to the bitter soul. And it's also been taught that the noble women in Jerusalem used to donate it. And so that's just a quote from the Savaroim, but it wasn't a halacha. It was them including the footnotes. Some of the work of the Savaroim is included in, and that's the last time we actually have text that is put into the body of the Talmud that we know it. If you open up a page of Gemara, you will see lots on the side. Yes, Rashi and the Bali Tosfos merited that their works get included as standard, but it's not within the body of the text. The last time any of the work gets included within the body of the text is during this period here, and according to Rav Shriram, it lasts for 89 years. This is the Savaroim. They can clarify a point of the Gemara, but he can't do something themselves. And he goes through day by day when each one of these Savaroim pass away. I mean, he tells you, on Sunday, the 4th of Adar in the year 817, which would be 506, Rav Achai bar Rav Huna passed away. And then he goes through year by year how long each one does it, and the fact that they end in the year 589, Common Era, and then we start with the time of the Gaonim. A word about the Gaonim before we go into them a lot next week. The Gaonim see themselves as scholars and as teachers and what we would say lawyers, not judges. The rabbis of nowadays have got the same sort of thing. We can quote precedents, but cannot establish a law. We are not judges that can turn around and say, this is the law. We can say, this is what the Torah says, and this is how it's developed within Gemara, and this is how it was codified in the Shulchan Aruch, and therefore, this is how we can apply it to nowadays. Take any any aspect of modern Jewish life, that's how we have to go along. We don't actually establish the law, we compare it to what was back then. The Gaonim do that for the next 400 or so years. So if the Saviroim end in the year 589, the Gaonim, the first Gaon we're going to be going along is, one of our first one of our Gaonim is within the yeshiva of Peros Shavor. You've got Reb Yitzchak Gaon, and during his time, the yeshiva goes back into Pumbedisa, and these continue the whole way along until the year 130, 134, when Gaonim ends. So right at the end of this week's century is when the Gaonim are going to start. The other problem at this time is that you now have, under Pope Gregory I, there are official negative papal policies against the Jews. And so for the next 400 plus years, Judaism within mainland Europe, really, it doesn't cease to exist, but it's very, very difficult. Thank the Lord, Israel is conquered by the Arabs. The main Jewish area in Bavel is under Muslim rule, and we are allowed to continue actually living our life there. In essence, that takes us along to the end of the century. I don't want to really start with Islam this lecture because there is so much which we need to learn about. But the only thing that happens in this one is that Muhammad is born in the year, well, roughly 571. He doesn't start his mission until next century in the year 610. So we'll learn about that in the next lesson, which will be in 2 weeks' time. And are there, just a second, hold on a second. Go back over here. Sorry, my apologies. Right, we're back there. Any questions on any of that there? Because we are sort of going from a crossroads now from post-Talmudic period into Gaonic one and into life under Islam as opposed to life under Christianity. Because for the next 400 years, Jewish life under Christianity is just darkness and hell. There's not really much to discuss. Yes, unless Chaibach, you got a comment to make there? No comment there. Anything from my esteemed crowd? No, you're all very quiet. Alan, yes.
No.
Sorry, David.
Where's your esteemed crowd?
Am I see the one that I'm looking at? Yes, Alan.
No, when did the Gaonim actually finish their input? And does any group come after them?
Yes. So the Gaonim end in the year 134, there or thereabouts. Sorry, 1034. At that point on, we then go on to the era called the Rishonim. Bear in mind, all of these names are given later on. The Rishonim, the early ones. Now, we mustn't confuse. The Vilna Gaon is not one of the Gaonim. The Vilna Gaon is an Acharoim, the final period from the 16th century onwards. The word Gaon literally means a clever person. Rav Sharira Gaon refers to some people in the time of the Amoraim and Savarim as Gaonim, because this was the head of the academy. But when we speak about the Gaonim, we by and large refer to the 4 centuries from roughly 590 up until 1030. That's the period of the Gaonim. During this time, you also have the Reish Galusa, the exile arc. We've got a number of problematic ones. In fact, I just want to quote, we've got one thing here which I marked down, which was interestingly enough, you have in 508, we've got Huna Bar Kahana becomes a Reish Galusa, and at this point, it was open for bidding. Towards the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, we got the same concept when you could bid to become the Kohen Gadol, and you'd pay the Romans. Now, in the 6th century, you could pay the Parthians. You could pay the Babylonians to become the Reish Galusa, and Huna Bar Kahana pays a lot. He is cruel, incompetent, and in the year 530, so just over 20 years later, him and his entire family died in very mysterious and suspicious circumstances. He's succeeded by Pachta, he bribes them. He does not come from the family of David HaMelech, That was the one thing about the Reish Galusa, which was established by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at the destruction of the second Beis Mikdash to keep someone from the house of David HaMelech alive. He bribes his way, he gets taken out by the Parthians, but they give his nephew, who's 15 years old, Hunna. He's also known as Zutra, Mar Zutra, not to be confused with another Mar Zutra who was an Amira, and he proves to be very strong and able. He begins in the year 538, and for 13 years, everything is going well. But he was so well in charge that he decides to raise an army. He raised an army not against the authorities, but against the marauding tribesmen who are terrorizing the Jewish population. Unfortunately, the Parthian king doesn't like the fact that he's basically got a police force working within his state. The fact that they were restoring law and order was by the by. He doesn't like that. And in 558, he crushes Mar Zutra's forces. The Reish Galusa ends. And for a while, there is no such thing as the Reish Galusa as the head of the academy. It does get picked up later on, and we do have it's picked up over, well, we've got Bustanai in the year 660. It's quite a famous one. We'll get to a little bit later on. Bustanai is quite a famous Reish Galusa, but we do have them, and they continue the whole way along until we get to the year 940. It's because of the Reish Galusa, David ben Zakkai, that we have the beginning of not reform, the Karaites start at this point, because they wanted to have the position of Reish Galusa, and it didn't go to them. It went to David ben Zakkai, but that's not until the mid-10th century. At the moment where we're in, halfway through the 6th century, the position of Reish Galusa stopped, because even though we had the authority, we collected our own taxes, we ran our own prisons, we also wanted to protect ourselves. And the Reish Galusa in the mid-6th century raises an army in order to protect his people. But the authorities, the king says, hey, they might rise up. That's exactly the same wording that Pharaoh said, let us act cunningly against the Jews, 10 years bear, in case they will come stronger than us. And if we are ever attacked by an outside force, they will be there on the borders. They will be a fifth column inside our own borders, and there's a ready-made army. As we get into the next subsequent centuries, with the fighting in Europe and, well, mainly in Spain, and the beginning of the start of the Middle East, when the Christians and Muslims are fighting against each other, the Jews always have to choose which side are they going to be on, because if they find themselves on the losing side, they're in trouble. But we managed to switch sides a number of times. That takes us to the end of today's lecture. I'm sorry, I've shortchanged you, only 45 minutes this time. Have you enjoyed yourselves? I'd say we're not on next 2 weeks' time. We will do the rise of Islam and its impact on Judaism, which is actually very, very interesting. I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, very, very welcome.
Thank you.
Mincha is at 7:30. Did you all have a l'chaim at the Chazans?
I didn't go.
I didn't go.
Okay, so I said to Nachas, I said, should have done it after Shacharit, but you know what? Remind me at Mincha time. I'll try and remember. We'll do l'chaim when everyone's together at the Minyan. Rather than that, I've got the same bottle of Lagavulin. We'll do it then. Don't forget, if you want to pick up a Yiska booklet, there's one here. Otherwise, I've sent you the
download.
Rabbi, are they outside?
They'll be in a box from tomorrow, in a plastic box. Yeah.
Tomorrow, not today.
Do you want me to?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'll put them out now. We'll put them out now. You can go pick them up now. Not a problem.
Maybe later.
Can
Okay.
you
You
leave
could
the
always knock on the window.
Yeah.
Can you leave the Lagavulin outside as well? So we can, tonight we're going to do the Chayim. Would you leave it
And some glasses. Some glasses.
If you want, I was going to drink it tonight. It's my 20th wedding anniversary, so I'm going to have some. But if you want it, I bought it. If you want it, Ralph, I'll
You
put
have
it
it,
outside.
Rabbi.
You can
You
have
have it, Rabbi. It's only for right.
Mazel tov, Rabbi.
Mazel
think-
tov.
it. All right. See you then.
Happy to-
Bye.
Easier.
Ralph, you've not had a delivery yet, have you?
No, I'm waiting, but I'll give you a ring as soon as it comes.
Yeah, I hope so, because I'm leaving